I remember the first day I was asked, what was my purpose of going on a travel study to Ghana? I simply replied that I have always been drawn to all things African, and it's where my ancestors came from. And since I've been privileged enough to return back, I must relish in the past. My journey started on the campus of the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater when I decided to think outside the box and gain an experience of a lifetime. I had never been on a plane before this, and nonetheless, it was an extremely long ride, and I often wondered how long it would have taken by ship. The same ships where many Africans were stacked like sardines in a can and chained to the floor on month's ends. The moment we touched down in Ghana, I was so excited. I just couldn't wait to get off that plane and just see something I'd never seen before. One of my goals was to travel to Africa, and this goal was met at that instant. But my second goal was to visit the slave castles. I had the privilege of visiting Elmina slave castle. During my time spent at Elmina slave castle, we entered the female slave dungeon. This is where they kept the female slaves. Just as unsanitary the conditions on the slave ships were, the dungeons were horrible as well. The women here were forced to sleep, release themselves, and have their menstrual cycles where they would eat. And they were hardly fed anything. They were fed enough to survive. At times, the governor of the slave castle would be lurking above the female slave dungeon. He'd pick out a female slave he was interested in, and someone would go down and grab her. They would wash her up in the middle of the courtyard. They would feed her a little bit for strength, and she'd be taken up to his room. After they had gathered enough slaves, they would take them to the slave castle exit. This was known as the door of no return. He said this was called the door of no return because the slaves left out this door and they were never to come back again. This door led to small boats that would take the slaves to the slave ships, in which the slave ships would take them to the sea. He asked all of us to take a look out of the door. I waited patiently until it was my turn. I walked up, and my heart began to become heavy because I finally made it back home. I was overwhelmed with so many emotions that I had to think, that I had to be alone, that I had to have time to self-reflect. I wrote a poem once before, and it didn't start to make sense until now. I once read that the great shame of all trees is that they have no conscience. I guess because the leaves flow wherever the wind blows and the seeds are carelessly planted. Watered by seas of evaporation, precipitation is what they call it, but my family tree was created with the seeds that bleed the creed. Drenched in tears, potent with fears of slaves or watery graves. Bodies and names of beautiful brains of people who lie there. Souls and memories submerged and fixed, skeletons anchored and chained from the wrists, sunk into the bottom of Atlantic abyss. We were here first. We pre-exist. Stolen, enslaved, and later on lynched. Was this his plan, or was he just remiss? How could God create such beasts as this? My family tree was created with the seeds that bleed the creed. My hair, my skin, my facial features are enriched from the sun and the soil of a place far, far away from here. A long journey south of this hemisphere. And since I sprouted, becoming a leaf of prosperity, I won't plead for no one's sympathy. I'll leave, flee, going back to the days that we were all free before slavery and majority's unity was seen. I fiend for those roots and stories that were nowhere near as boring. Legends and tales of people not pale being kings and queens of their own dynasty. My family tree was created with the seeds that bleed the creed of Africa. Needless to say, in all the bad, there is some good, because we wouldn't exist.
This one's for the one in love, and for the one who's found that one and place no one above. I saw many copping, I worry for the more I'm a trimping. So that was the one to me, the one tonight. Hey, this one is for you.